everybody for joining, giving me the opportunity to chat with y'all and to share my perspective. I'm really looking forward to doing this, and hopefully it'll be a great time. I also appreciate the lead-in that Pedro gave. I like to reflect on the why, and I see our purpose here at HR in both design and OM and delivery as really helping to enable IBMers to do their best work. And I think that one of the ways that we best do that is when we collaborate together to keep in mind not only a solution or a product or an offering that is something that people both want to use and we can actually ship, but also something that the business values and wants to continue investing in. And I'm hoping that that's something that I can help add a little perspective on today. So a couple of mechanics, I know we already went over some of these at the beginning. I like setting a positive mental attitude first. So cast yourself, your mind back real quick. Just think about, man, that place I saw, that was so beautiful. That was really nice. Wow, I can carry that forward and really enjoy my time here with these people today. I promise today I'm not going to do any forced quizzing of the screen, but please either make comments in chat the whole way through if you want. I'm not going to have it up, but I will look at it later because I don't want to disturb my ability to see the screen. So there's no pressure. You can throw anything in the chat you want, and we can come back to it later. If you have something burning that you think everybody needs to hear, please feel free to interrupt. I may ask questions, but if I do, it is not intended to be like a quiz. It's intended to be a rhetorical question, and I promise I won't stare at you and start saying Bueller or something like that. I'll drive on and keep making my points until the end when we have time for questions. So if I ask a question, I'm not looking at you. I'm just making a point. And then please give feedback afterwards. This is the first time I've given this particular presentation, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about starting with why, starting with the purpose of what you have assembled a group together to do, and how that can really help us set a mission statement, an intention, and then we can break that into how we're going to deliver on that why. And then finally, what it is that we're actually going to deliver. We're going to talk about measuring those points, both the how and the what, and a method of doing that called OKRs, which stands for Objectives and Key Results. We're going to do a little bit of what is offering management, but also we're going to do why is it important? What do OMs want to measure? And why do they want to measure that thing? And then I've got a practical example for you from my own time, specifically here inside of HR with the OM acceleration team. So this is the agenda I want to run through, and then we'll also have time for questions. And if anybody feels that burning need to interrupt, please feel free to do that. So I like to start off with who is this guy and why is he talking to me? I'm driven by a personal mission to learn and teach so that others can better survive and thrive through understanding knowledge. And I've lived that mission several different ways through my life. You know, I did it as a smart-mouthed kid in college when I was studying at University of Colorado Boulder, which is actually not the most beautiful place I've ever seen, surprisingly. Maybe things haven't changed that much because I'm here spouting off to you about the book that I've read most recently and enjoyed the most, but hopefully I can do it with a little more humility than I used to in my college days. Then my mission to learn and teach took on a pretty literal meaning to help people survive and thrive as a ground intelligence officer in the Marine Corps. And learning and teaching really had some implications on people's survivability for several years of my life. I did 7 years as a ground intelligence officer, a year of that as an advisor, helping Afghan military members learn how to apply techniques to make better decisions and achieve what they needed to get done. I went back to school at UNC Kenan Flagler and studied to get my MBA in consulting and in operations. And I did my internship at Amazon over the summer, where I did see the most beautiful place I've ever been to, which is Sequim, Washington. Nowhere else do you get mountains and ocean and lavender farms all together. It's pretty crazy. And then for the past 3 years, I've been here at IBM. 2 of those I've been working in API connecting gateways. And this past year I've joined the OM acceleration team, working closely with our design colleagues, trying to make things better and better for IBMers so that they can do their best work. That's the context and the background that I bring to this and what's shaped my thinking. And it leads me to the importance of starting with why. That's something that's been important throughout all the experiences I've had, whether it be in the military, where our missions are defined in a 5W format: who, what, when, where, and most critically, why you are doing this, because the why allows you to change any of the other W's. You can change the what, you can change the when, you can change the where if you understand the why. And I want to give an example of this. Some folks here might recognize this as the golden circle that Simon Sinek discovered and popularized, and I totally encourage you to go check it out. We're barely going to breeze through it as context to move forward into other things we're going to discuss, but there's a lot more deep here, and you can look into that. As a great TED Talk and a lot of supporting documentation and books. The way I want to emphasize the importance of starting with why, moving to how, and then what the thing that you're actually going to do is I want to do it backwards for you first and show that it can kind of be jarring and not very inspiring. So if we were to do this for Apple and we were to do it the way that a lot of people are tempted to do it, we would say what? Apple, we make computers. They're really good computers. They're some of the best computers. How do we do it? Well, we hire some really great people, good industrial designers, good developers, and we make sure we maintain strict control over the design and iteration process so that both of them work really well together. One of the problems is that when you take that approach, you often forget the why the company exists in the first place. And it's difficult to go up that stack. Where instead, if you start with why and move outward, you can tell a really compelling story. Apple did this very famously with a lot of their marketing and advertising, but you can tell that it permeates their culture and it drives how they actually do their work. The why at Apple is a sense that we all kind of have intuitively. They believe in thinking different. They believe in challenging the status quo and that every individual should uh, take a look at the world as it is and ask why that is and improve on it, set their own path, be an innovator. So how do they do that? Well, they do it by combining the best design, the best development, the best industrial design, maintaining a rigorous control, and in that way, they deliver the best product to everybody. What do? They sell computers. As I read it, that makes a much more compelling and powerful story. And so keeping that in mind and starting with why on anything you're doing, whether it's delivering an offering or embarking on a project, can really help bring focus to a team. But as we get into the how and the what, I'm going to do a little bit of dogfooding and I'm going to start with why you would want to measure what matters. Do I have a question? Mute by accident. So why might you want to measure what matters? Well, I'd like you to imagine a world with me where we work with focus, alignment, commitment, tracking, and stretching. I think we've all experienced pieces of this, but we've also all experienced their opposites. We've experienced backlogs that are dozens and hundreds of items long. When we ask leadership, hey, what's the most important thing here? And they say all of it. Alignment. We've all experienced those moments where nobody knows what somebody else is working on. And sometimes there's redundant offerings that do the exact same thing. Commitment. Sometimes things just keep sliding and sliding, and it seems like nobody really owns something. Tracking. We don't really know if we're making progress. We know we're continuing to work, but we're really not sure. And then stretching. Sometimes all of these other challenges lead us to try and just do what's possible, which can, at its worst case, start to look a little bit like sandbagging. What if there were a way that were demonstrated that could help us do all of these things and had some really big names behind them that have performed extremely well doing it? There are. Intel, Google, Netflix, Slack, Adobe, these are all companies that have well publicized practices of adopting objectives and key results, where initially it came out of Intel. It was pitched at Google when Larry and Sergey were still in a garage by one of the Kleiner Perkins venture capitalists, John Doerr, who then went on to write the book Measure What Matters. So how do you use them? Well, you can use them by applying them to any kind of defined goals. The objective part is the goal and intent that you have. The key results are time bound and they're measurable milestones under these goals and intents. And critically, achieving the key result must mean that the objective has been achieved. You can't attain the key results and not achieve the objective. This is important to be done collaboratively and openly. And this is the way that you can gain all of those of focus or facts that included focus, alignment, commitment, tracking, and stretching. It's an acronym. I love acronyms. What was that? What could that possibly have to do with soccer? Or can it really be used to define any goals, including soccer? Yes, it can, and I have an example. So if you were to define an OKR for winning the World Cup, how could we make that measurable, trackable, and how can we define 3 to 5 key results that will mean that you will win the World Cup? Well, if you were to have average scored goals of 2 through the whole tournament, seeded goals below zero point 0.5 through the tournament, and ball possession of 75%, I think it would be virtually impossible for you to not win the World Cup. And so if you define each of these key results, you have it set such that you will achieve your objective. Interestingly, you can also take key results and feed them down from that point to subordinate groups or individuals. So here you might have a defensive goal of no more goals allowed than 0.5, and that becomes the objective. And then you can define key results for that. How do you do that? Well, you can define clearing rates for your defenders. You can define shot on goal stops for your keeper. And in that way, you can have each person nest their goals with what needs to be done to get the work done and how you want to do it. So how does this tie in to hills and epics and stories? When I was chatting with Owen and Pedro before this, that was one of the pieces of feedback, and it's a really important point. So I wanted to point out that hills and epics and stories are very specialized goal statements that are intended to drive user value in the product delivery itself. And I was thinking about this and I thought, as it turns out, we're already using objectives and key results when we do our best hills or when we do our best epics or stories, because the best defined hills include a wow, and that best wow is always going to be quantifiable. I was watching one of the definitions of enterprise design thinking in a hill, and one of the examples really struck me. The story of the Geico hill, the who, what, wow of 15 minutes can save you 15% or more on car insurance. And that really includes a very measurable and quantifiable key result. So each of these frameworks can still work with OKRs. They're just a more focused method of goal setting that have to do specifically with product delivery, where OKRs can be applied very generally. So how are offering managers going to be using them? Well, to answer that, I want to talk about a couple of pieces of context. The purpose of a corporation, getting hired to do jobs, and what OMs must always do, what we're always going to focus on. And Pedro was mentioning earlier the importance of going and taking that HR Ways of Working 101 course. This is actually borrowed from that, these top 2 points. So our job as OMs is to make sure that value is being created. And in the market facing offerings, this means that we're always looking for revenue. We're always looking to earn money and trying to find something that we can provide to people that they are willing to pay for. But that's not the only important thing in a corporation or in any organization. We also want to make sure that we're controlling costs and that we're delivering value in other important ways. So that's our focus. And it's important to keep in mind as you're thinking about what OMs are going to use to define the overall goals of the organization they're working with, that we work within corporations. What is the purpose of a corporation? Oracle question. You don't have to answer. You can throw it in if you want. As compared to a nonprofit or a military unit or some other organization that could still use OKRs to define goals, that still has a why and a how and a what, the corporation exists to make money. Now, it may also, in making money, be serving a greater mission. The best corporations do. But in order to be a corporation, it must keep making money. So a little bit of my time in the MBA probably coming out, but at the risk of sounding too much like a mercenary, the purpose of a corporation is to profit. Profit is revenue minus costs. And when you think about that, you can start to look for areas where you can create value with the offerings that you create. A further breakdown that can be helpful is to look at fixed revenue and variable revenue, fixed costs and variable costs. And if you think about a really simple business like a t-shirt business that I've started, you might think that my fixed revenue, well, I probably don't have any fixed revenue. I don't have any money I'm going to get guaranteed no matter what. I only make money when I sell something. So I can hold fixed revenue constant at 0, and I can look just at the variable revenue. And I look over at my fixed costs and I think, what kind of fixed costs am I going to have in my t-shirt business? Well, I probably need a website so that I can sell it if I'm individually doing this. That's really not going to change no matter how many shirts I sell. My variable costs are where things get interesting. That's where I'm going to have to pay for shipping for every single order I get. I'm going to have to pay for production of the shirt every time I get an order. And so we can look at making sure that the variable revenue is greater than the variable costs. And we do that by creating a product that people really want and by controlling the costs and making sure that that doesn't get out of control. So I can hire the best possible designer to make me a beautiful t-shirt, and then I can go and look for the most expert supply chain logistics that I can rent from Amazon to make sure that I'm getting the best bang for my buck and the simplest distribution. In HR at IBM, we can also look at ways we can impact both revenue and cost. I think most of us, most of the time, spend our time in the cost area, and that's probably appropriate because most of what we can do for IBM is reducing cost. But there are some times when we can help increase revenue. Speeding delivery comes to mind. So if we can help more rapidly reskill a GBS consultant or a GTS expert to something else that they can do productively, we can get someone onto an account faster than they were able to before. And that brings revenue faster than it would have otherwise had. If we look at retaining talent that would have gone elsewhere, we look at saving a significant cost in recruiting somebody out from the market where it's much more expensive. If we look at one of the mandates that the OM acceleration team and the employee design thinking team share, simplifying the offerings that we offer and making a more common experience is a significant potential to reduce costs as we save people time and attention, arguably some of the most valuable resources that anybody has. Let me go off on a tangent for a second and say there's some really interesting writing that I've read, musing on how companies tend to be very focused on money, and it's very difficult to spend money. If you think about how hard it can be to get travel approved or to negotiate for raises or for new equipment or for new software that you think is valuable, you think about all the processes IBM has to make sure that the spending is controlled. But if you think about the most valuable resource, the thing that we can never get more of, time, individuals' time, think about how we're treating that and how easy it is for somebody to impose on someone else's time and just throw time on your calendar right away, or insist that you take care of something, or provide multiple duplicative experiences and offerings to get done similar or the same jobs. This is something that we can do to really cut down on the amount of time that IBMers have to spend to get done the work that they have to get done. So to summarize back, it's always important for offering managers to keep in mind, what are we trying to impact in terms of cost or in terms of revenue as we deliver this offering? And a big part of that is the concept of getting hired to do a job. There's this famous quote that you may well have heard: people don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. The whole purpose is to have something at the end. So the job to be done isn't a drill or a drill bit. The job to be done is a hole in the wall at the right place and the right time. Again, this is a very superficial view of something that goes a lot deeper, that Professor Clay Christensen, sadly recently deceased, promulgated with the jobs to be done paradigm. And there's some really fascinating stuff, like what's the job to be done of a McDonald's McFlurry. The result of that might surprise you if you ever want to go off on a tangent and do some interesting reading. But it's not just businesses that hire a product or an offering or a service to do a job. And it's not just customers, it's also users. So even if there isn't actual payment, you're still hiring something to do a job for you. So it's pretty easy to think of the business hiring something to get a job done. If you think about the new recruiting Select for IBM offering, IBM is hiring this offering in order to hire new employees at IBM. Its purpose is to get that done more efficiently and more effectively. You think about customers, especially external customers, can make it a little bit easier. That's somebody who is paying you to do something for them. And the inevitable test of product market fit is, will somebody pay you to do this? And that's what we often focus on in the OM discipline at IBM is somebody going to pay me to do this? Is a CXO, CIO, or CMO going to pay for this offering to exist and to roll out to their entire enterprise? But users also hire you to do a job, even if they don't directly pay you. And a good way to think about this is some of the consumer apps out there. Um, you hire Facebook to do a job, and it can be interesting to sit and reflect on what job are you hiring Facebook to do? You're hiring them with your time. Your time's extremely valuable, like we just talked about. And for a lot of people, the job to be done by Facebook is to fill time that otherwise was to entertain you, to provide momentary entertainment. There's a concept of found time that used to exist but wasn't valued highly by the individual who was possessing it. Example, you're in the grocery store and you're standing in line and you feel that compulsion to pull out your phone and take a look at Facebook to fill that vacant time. You're hiring it with your attention to entertain you for a little bit. We do the same thing here at IBM, where we do a job for our users, for our customers, and for the business overall. And keeping in mind what each of them is hiring us to do can make sure that we stay on track to continue delivering the value that they need to be able to keep doing that job for them. So you've probably seen an interlocking circles diagram like this before, and I think it's really helpful. This is essentially the core of product delivery and offering delivery and creation. What I did here is I kind of framed it in terms of the jobs to be done in specific. So we all understand that design are experts at understanding whether users want to use something. And there's always overlapping areas that different disciplines own together. You know, design and UX design and front-end developers are going to work together on, can users actually effectively use it? Delivery is in the end going to exclusively own, can it be built? I'm not going to tell them as an offering manager if they can build it or not. But then I'm going to work together with delivery to talk about, can it be built on time and on budget? Are we able to do this? I'm going to work with design to talk about, are users going to be willing to spend that valuable time that we talked about using this? Are they going to spend money on it? But inevitably, the only thing that it's not responsible, or it would be irresponsible for me as an offering manager to ask design or delivery to own the product. Is it worth paying for? And I'm getting a request to annotate the shared content. I don't know how to do that, and at risk of interrupting the flow, I'm going to decline it. But please throw a comment in the chat. And then at the intersection of all three of these, you find an offering that is truly doing its job. It's something that users want to use. They're willing to spend their time and money on it. They can effectively use it. It can be built. It can be built on time and budget, and it's worth paying for. That means the offering is truly and fully doing its job. All right. So some brass tacks and some examples of business metrics you might choose to use. A lot of folks are familiar with things like wanting to grow a business, wanting to make profit, like I was talking about, wanting to make sure that their customers are successful, that costs are controlled, that services are available, and that infrastructure costs are controlled. And there can be some key performance indicators that can be used to track and make sure that each of those is trending in the one. What I would say for objectives and key results is, remember that the purpose is to focus. So while you may have many key performance indicators that do need to be tracked in some way for business as usual, objectives and key results are those things that you define as crucial to be front of mind and to have real attention paid to them. So you might choose a few of these to be key results for one of your objectives. Something that's critical is to retain focus and to track a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5 objectives. And for each objective, a min and max of 3 to 5 key results for each of those as well. That way, you really aren't going too far and rehashing that enormous backlog of dozens of things that you want to get done. And this can apply to HR also. We look at some of the some of the people metrics that folks track here in IBM HR, and some of the process metrics. We can think about ways that we might track these. They may be the best way to track the key results for some of our objectives. And offering managers may want to take a look at this and turn some of these into the key results that are going to track some of those business objectives to make sure that we continue to provide value and demonstrate value to the business. Think about the when of the metrics. So some indicators and some metrics are going to be leading indicators, and some metrics are going to be lagging indicators. Lagging indicators tend to be very conclusive. So the example here is leading: calories ingested, exercise hours completed, numbers of desserts each day, how often are you getting out and walking the dog. Lagging: your weight. So you can similarly think about it for a business. Inevitably, you're going to show profit. That's going to be a lagging indicator. Leading indicators might be things like the growth of the market as a whole, the share of the market that you control, the revenue that you're taking in. And Phil has made a very compelling case, Phil Gilbert, the head of design, that NPS, Net Promoter Score, is one of the best leading indicators of what revenue is going to be. So you can always be asking, how forward looking can we get one of these indicators and still have it be useful? And it can be really helpful for your objectives to have a mix of leading and lagging indicators, as long as you're going to be able to conclusively answer them at the end of the time period you've defined your key result for. Critical, because you need to be able to look at it and objectively say yes or no. Did we succeed? Did we not succeed? And it's important to do that without too much judgment, to just use it to learn. But if you choose a key result that can be ambiguous, you're not going to get the full value out of it. So you want to pick something that is going to have concluded in the time period that you're measuring your objective. So I've provided a list here, and I've borrowed a lot of this heavily from my manager, Alex Bentley. So I want to give him credit for it too. Actually, I've borrowed everything I'm talking about here from one person or another: Simon Sinek, John Doerr, and Clayton Christensen, now Alex Bentley. But hey, you get rehashed, so that's what's going to happen. This provides a wide variety of different key performance indicators that might make good key results to pull in to measure an objective. And I'm going to provide this, and I know Pedro's going to post it, so you can always come back. I'm not going to read through all of these. I don't think that would be a good use of everybody's time, but I wanted to show an example that there's a lot out there that you can use to measure your objective. And it's most important not to back into this. Don't pick your key results and have key performance indicators that give you objectives. Go back and start with why. What's your purpose? Why are you here? How are you going to do that? Those can become your objectives, and then what you actually get done can be the key results. So to show an example of this and to make it very concrete, my first big embed assignment, the offering management acceleration team here, we have a mission to help IBM HR teams to prioritize their offerings in order to make IBMers best at what they do. And we do it three key ways. We do it through education and training. We do it through overall portfolio optimization across the whole thing. And then we also do it by embedding directly in areas that are really high value and important. And the first one for me was blue matching in the fall of last year. And I would be lying if I told you that I had all of this completely straight when I was in the fall of last year. These are retrospective to some extent. The only one that was really very clear and had both objectives and key results defined at the time is objective number one. The other two we were working on, but we were not working on them in this organized of a way. So when we looked at what we were trying to get done with blue matching, our why was we believe it should be easier to find a job inside of IBM than outside. That seems on its face to be a very obvious statement, but it took some work to get to it, because there's some folks who are so focused on inertia and the thing that they own that they forget that that's actually not really a true statement. It can actually be quite easy outside of IBM for a lot of IBMers instead of finding one inside. How are we going to do that? Well, we are going to do it with AI scaled, which would allow us to address all IBMers so that we don't have to have a human going in and checking this for everybody. No input required. So we didn't have IBMers have to go in, complete a profile, because then there's no way we would have been able to get out to the full scale. And default opted in. where before we had piloted for years a process where IBMers came and voluntarily opted in, we just were not getting to the scale that we needed to really have an impact in making it easier to find a job inside of IBM. What? Well, it ended up being job recommendations delivered to every IBMer. So if you've been getting blue matching in your email, this is that. Our first objective was to make, I had a mistake in here, make blue matching, not IBM, so BM, the top destination for IBM internal jobs. And we had defined key results for this. One of those was we were going to opt everybody in by default that we possibly could. So we grew that about 7x. We couldn't grow at a full 10x because the numbers just weren't possible. And then we wanted to carry that through to each other measure in the funnel. We wanted to increase our yearly active users, the number of IBMers that went in and actually looked at their results to above 50,000 by the fourth quarter of 2019. And we wanted to increase placements. That is, an IBMer who looked at results and got a job that had been provided to them as a result to above 300 as a run rate, meaning 150 in the second half of 2019. And I've scored these using the Google system of a scale of 1.0 for fully achieved to 0.0, not at all achieved in any way, shape, or form. And I'm happy to say that the team really worked hard and completed this first objective. It's not all perfect. We also wanted to make it the best experience we possibly could. And there were some key results within that. We wanted to launch an integration with your learning and your career, and that was done. It slid a little bit from when we had originally defined it. So I've knocked it down to a 0.8 instead of a 1.0. We didn't make it to increasing our user feedback to the level I wanted to. In fact, I didn't even have a number against this originally. I just said, I want to increase user feedback. I want to get more feedback from people. But then as I looked back on this with the frame of objectives and key results, I said, I can make this more quantifiable. I can say how much feedback I want to be representative. Is it fair to say we have a representative sample if we have anything less than 1% of the people that are coming and using it? Probably not. So we've increased the feedback received to almost 0.4% in one way or another between email or joining our user Slack. I want to be able to measure NPS for it in order to measure the subjective match results and the qualitative comments. We were not able to implement a system that allows users to do that directly in the experience. We do have a way to get some of that through Slack. So I'm giving us credit for that instead of scoring it as a 0. We do have a way to ingest and take in feedback and comments, but it's really not very effective or rigorous. So I didn't want to score us too high. And so I set another key result that we just can't measure yet because we don't have that rigorous system. And I want to increase NPS of matches 10% above baseline first. We need that baseline. And then as I was looking back on it, I also noticed that we were doing some demonstration of value to the investment. Should IBM keep investing in this, and why would it be useful? And the top line of it is we do have a value that we can estimate, the value of placing an IBMer internally instead of having to go out and hire them. And there was some pretty rigorous math done around that. And so we can take the number of placements we made, we can multiply it by that number, and we can aggregate the amount of value that we have delivered to IBM, mostly on the cost side. There's some other things we can do too. We can provide reusable services rather than having to rebuild job recommendations every time. We can use an API to allow multiple different experiences, your career and your learning, to call the same API that has the same results as the old Cognos report used to have. And we were successful with that. And the cloud infrastructure to help future-proof, and we decreased our calculation time. But again, I want to remind you that a lot of these things were a little bit messy. I didn't really put this rigorous measurement system onto it until I was looking back on it and thinking through what we did. And I want to emphasize, I wish I had done it this way the first time around. This is a learning of my own that I'm sharing with you that I think if I had been able to put these in front of the team, I think everybody would have been able to invest that much harder towards these, or to disagree and to collaborate towards a key result that would better measure each of these objectives together. So that's your practical example. I I want to remind you what we talked about today. We talked at the very beginning about starting with why. We talked about how we can measure what matters and what that looks like in the end with objectives and key results. We talked about what is OM and what are they always going to be looking for, that business value, doing that job that needs to be done, that's getting hired by a user or by a customer or by a business or by all three. We looked at a practical example where I shared some of my own personal learnings. And now we have saved a little bit of time for questions and answers. I can absolutely flip back earlier, but before I do, and while I still have the floor, I'd like to ask you to share your feedback, please, with the survey that's going to come out to you. I'd really appreciate um, what you thought of this, things that you thought were useful, things that you thought weren't as useful and I shouldn't have spent as much time on. I wanted to make another plug for completing that HR Ways of Working 101 because I enjoyed it. I thought it was really helpful. It was challenging. Um, and there were actually answers that I did not anticipate in there, even some of them on OM and design. So the fact that it pushed me is really valuable to me. And then I'd like to invite you to join our HROM Slack channel also if this interests you and if you're interested in a little bit of cross-pollination. We're working on getting our own OM chapter up and going, kind of on the model of this design thinking chapter. And that is all. Thank you so much for your time and for the opportunity to talk with you. Are there any questions I can answer? If they're right there.
Could you go back to the ways of measuring slide that you had?
Which one are you thinking of? This one, this one?
This one. This one should like photocopy it and like give it to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so helpful. I think this is where people get caught up in like, because a lot of our work in HR is so qualitative, we have a hard time figuring out how am I going to quantitatively put a, how I'm going to measure my success in a meaningful way to the business.
That's a great point, on. Yeah, absolutely. Everybody's welcome to have this. And then when Pedro posts it, I'll also post it in our OM box and make it available to the whole company. I'll also say one thing that I recently discovered is one of the projects I'm working on is defining what's the state of offering management in HR right now. And I came in so excited having just read Measure What Matters by John Doerr. I was telling Alex, I'm going to get everybody to read this book. It's going to be great. And he was like, you're jumping into the solution before you define the problem, man. Like, you got to make sure to go and talk with your users. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. Okay, I'm going to talk with OMs and HR and see how they think we're doing and how things are going for them. And as I was thinking about making that into personal objective with a key result to measure it, my objective has become understand the state of offering management within HR. And one of the key results, and this is putting a quantitative measurement on something that's pretty qualitative, is I'm going to do a minimum of 5 interviews with HR offering managers and get their 3 most important lessons about what's going well and what they want to improve. So I just took something that was very qualitative and made it into something that I can go out and say either yes, I did it or no, I didn't. And I think that there's a great opportunity for us to blend some of the qualitative and the quantitative, or at least quantitatively measure how much qualitative feedback we want to have and whether we got to it or not. Other ideas of questions?
No questions.
Yeah, we just got a request to post that slide in the Slack channel, so I'm doing that just now.
Cool. There you go.
A comment from Jillian about how users can feel if they have mandatory experiences here at HR that they don't value. They might feel like they've gotten a really bad deal, like they've been forced to buy something that wasn't valuable with their time and attention. I totally agree with that. We all know the feeling of buyer's remorse where you went out and bought something and you are just super disappointed that it happened. Or maybe it's even worse. Maybe you had no choice. Like you're required by your state to go buy an experience like tax, title, and tags for your car, and you got to sit in the DMV for a long period of time. You have an opportunity to make something that's valuable to them, rather than forcing them to buy something they don't want to buy. It's a cool point.
Question kind of based on that point, Richard, because I think that's so true, right? There is that kind of element of buyer's remorse, and as you were talking, I was relating so much to that example of Select for IBM, where we knew we had these business objectives. We kind of knew there were some things that maybe weren't the most ideal user experience, and we know that now. Looking at this, I'm like, these are the kinds of KPIs or OKRs that we really need to have. But I guess, do you have any suggestions for how to I guess kind of take those relationships with the users after maybe you did roll out something that wasn't the best experience, going back and then kind of trying to backtrack on that buyer's remorse? Does that make sense?
I think so. I think I heard a question saying, if you know you've made a mistake and you've maybe tracked something you shouldn't have been tracking, or delivered an experience that's maybe not fulfilling what a user wanted, you're asking if there might be a good way to re-engage with them.
Yeah.
My suggestion would be transparency and honesty, and say, listen, we had this idea we thought was great, and it turns out that the way we were measuring it may not have been the most valuable. We'd love to have a conversation, a follow-up, your input to help us measure this better, because our goal is, and back to your why, our goal is this. How we're trying to get that done is these objectives. But we think maybe there's room for improvement. Can we talk? That's what I would suggest. And I'd be eager to hear if Owen or Pedro has a suggestion on that too, since it has to do with user experience. I kind of broke my rule about forced questioning. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No worries. I think one of the key things that when I'm thinking about that question, Mindy and Rich, is when we are, tasked with any, of our executive requests, it's about asking the right questions as to why. Like, what do we hope to succeed in completing this, implementing this new experience, or changing, this, experience from what it was to what you're requesting. And that kind of like helps set us up to get ahead of delivering something that may have not have been like wanted in the first place then. But also to, being able to ask the right questions and have that conversation with our stakeholders as to, what are we looking to improve? How are we strategically going to measure that this experience that we're changing is improving? So being able to ask those strategic questions at the beginning before we go 10 miles down the road and realize that it's like, whoops, that's not what people want. It's like, that helps us get ahead of, building, not building what IBMers want or what IBMers really need.
Quickly, I want to mention a question from Kelly. The importance of taking something that can look a little fuzzy and making it into that measurable yes/no question. So specifically about career velocity or overall engagement as ways to measure. Some of these things are a little bit fuzzy still here, and can we put a number to it? So I would suggest for career velocity, you might look at for a given specialty or a given career path, the frequency of promotions, both band level and raises, because then you can put quantitative measures against that, and you can aggregate that across larger groups of people, and you could also measure it to industry benchmarks. Or overall engagement, I think engagement can be measured both by, if it's an offering that you're trying to measure for engagement, you can measure the number of monthly active users, daily active users, depending on what kind of job to be done it is, if it's a daily kind of job or a monthly kind of job. And then you also mix that with a qualitative score, like a net promoter score. So how much is our offering getting used, and how much are people enjoying using it? And are they getting done the thing that they came to do on it? So for blue matching, I might measure not just did they look at the page, but did they click through to a specific job? And how often are they doing that, or what percentage of time are they actually getting done? I think they're hiring my offering to do. Does that help a little, Kelly?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rich, for this. And I'm sure there are a lot of other questions. We can use our chapter Slack channel for that. And I'm volunteering you to help answer those questions too.
Do it.
But thank you so much again. And thanks everybody for joining. And see you again next time. Have a great one.